Hi guys, just a quick video because I forgot to say what you're going to need in your ingredients list. For the sweet pastry, you'll need 500 grams of strong flour. You'll need 250 grams of unsalted butter, cold. You'll need 125 grams of caster sugar and 65 grams of water. Right, and for the frangipan, you will need 200 unsalted butter, 200 grams of caster sugar, 200 grams of whole egg, and 200 grams of ground almonds. Plus, you will need 50 grams of strong white flour. All of these recipes will be found on my website, which is www.thepastrychefcornwall.co.uk. It's free to join. It's just so you need to join to get into the recipes, just so I can see who's actually actively taking part. Thank you. You will also need a couple of other things. You need either pastry rings or flan cases or rings, baking trays. You will need 2 flat trays or 1 flat tray, depending on how many you're making. And that's about how you use your mixing bowls, parchment paper, etc, etc. You'll also need jam as well, whatever filling you want jam wise, and some flaked almonds if you can get hold of flaked almonds. So I mean, the recipes that I put up are the 2 basic recipes will be your pastry and also your frangipan. The rest, the filling, the jam and the topping is up to you. Right, hello, welcome back. This time we will be doing Bakewell Tart. So there's a few variables in this one, obviously. You'll be making the pastry case and the pastry. You'll be making the frangipan. We're not going to go into making jam, although that is a good aspect of it, and it's a good one to sort of practice. But not everyone's going to want to make jam, especially when there's jam in the cupboards already. And then we will again make the frangipan, which is, I've seen many different ways of making frangipan, but we're going to make a really light and airy frangipan, or pastry cream, or whatever you want, or not, almond cream, if you want to call it that. But yeah, so it's a nice, simple-ish recipe, but what you'll see at the end of it is something spectacular. For this one, you'll also need either pastry rings, like I've got here. This one's going to be a large one, and then I've got 2 smaller ones for the cherry ones I'm going to do. You would definitely need, you will need a piping bag and a rolling pin, and of course all the ingredients that I'm going to go through in a minute. And yeah, trays. And the trays, I line my trays anyway, always for security, because we're gonna do a bit of blind baking, and then we'll introduce the frangipan. A lot of people will cook their Bakewell tarts all in one go, but I find that it is not a good process, simply because the frangipan will cook a lot faster than the base of your pastry. So I blind bake the pastry case for a bit first, not fully, and then remove that, let it cool down, and then we add in the rest of the ingredients, and that way you'll get a nice crisp and short crust on your pastry. So yeah, but I will walk you through all those sort of things, and again, just enjoy the bake, and I hope you get to make it. Right, here I have just some basic margarine. Well, it's not actually basic; it's that one I'm using. But really, you can use any fat to line your ring. But you must do that to prevent it sticking. Anyway, try when you're doing it. Obviously, you're going to go around like this. And now I'm using a ring with holes in it. I got off, where did I get them? Amazon. You can use normal pastry rings, or you can use the sandwich tins, as long as they've got a loose bottom. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get it out when you need to get it out. So yeah, we use loose bottom or pastry rings without the holes. I just find, you know, with these ones, obviously you're going to get better aeration and a more equal cook of your pastry because of the holes. At this stage, don't worry if you're blocking the holes, because as it cooks, the butter obviously will melt, or the margarine will melt. You know, it's a nice light coating. It's not a heavy coating. As you see, look, some will come out the side there, so you just wipe that all off. Okay. Let me just get something to wipe my hand. So once you've done that part, obviously I've got some under here. I've got some smaller ones which I'll be doing for the cherry. That's hopefully if I've got enough frangipane. I'm just going to have to weigh it out to make sure I've got enough there. But yeah, what you want to do as well, which I've always done, just make sure it's not too much butter in there. Okay, so I mean at work I'd use a spray grease, non-stick spray grease to go all the way around there. I mean they're so much quicker, and obviously butter can burn, but you know, you'll be fine. So right, so in here I'm just gonna put the flour around it. All the way around. Hopefully you can see that. Oh, you're out of shot. So after you buttered your ring, then coat it with a really fine coat of flour, and of course that will make it nice and non-stick, and you've got a, you know, your pastry case will just pop out of there without any trouble. Failing to do that, again, you can use grease and flour, any sort of fat to grease it. And so yeah, I'm going to do the same with the other rings, and then we'll go into making the pastry. So after we've made the pastry, we'll then make the frangipane. Okay, for now for the sweet pastry, it's a fairly simple ish process, and this pastry is my go-to sort of pastry. In the bowl I have 500 grams of strong flour, but it works with plain flour. It doesn't have to be the strong type. It's just what I've got most of at the moment. I then have some very cold unsalted butter. That's 250 grams of unsalted butter. So work the pastry as cold as you can. You can even, you know, chill your flour in the fridge. Make sure that your butter is nice and cold. This all can be done by hand, but if you're doing it by hand, obviously, when you're rubbing your flour and your butter together, you know, you rub it, but you don't touch your hands together. You don't push the butter into the flour. What you're doing is you're rubbing them together, so it coats each grain of flour in a layer of butter, and you just keep on doing that until you get a really fine crumb. It does take a little while, but you persist and be very gentle with it, and you'll get a nice crumb at the end of it. So and with this one I'm going to do that. So I've cubed my butter nice and small, so it's going to take a little bit less time to coat the flour on a nice slow speed. Just make sure I'm not going to squash my butter at the bottom. There you go. And a very nice slow speed, because again at the start it may just flick everywhere like it does, because that's the nature of this. But we'll be alright. So yeah, on the slowest speed on your mixer, and what we're going to look for is a nice fine crumb. This does take a little while. While you're waiting for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my sugar here. I'm going to put it into my bowl. That's 125 of sugar, and then I've got roughly around 65 grams of water, and that's going to go in with my sugar. And this will be our binding agent for our pastry. Now this pastry, when you do it by hand, you can use it straight away, because what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to work the gluten whatsoever in this, because I want it to be nice and short. And if you work the gluten, obviously it's not going to be as short as it can be. With this one, you can use it straight away, because it'll be nice and cold, ready to go. But what we'll do is I'll show you how we bring it together once we add the liquid. Okay, so it's come to a nice fine crumb, and there's no big lumps of fat in there. So what I'm going to do now, so I'm going to slowly add my liquid and my sugar and water. Obviously not too slowly, but yeah, make sure you're scraping down. And what I'm going to look for now is it just start to come together. Once it gets to that stage, I'm going to remove it and then push it together with my hands, rather than working the gluten in the flour. I'll keep filming so you can get a full understanding of where we need to be. I mean, it looks like there's not enough liquid in there, but believe me, it does come together and it does work really well. So as you can see now, I'm going to leave it about here. So I think if you go beyond this, you're going to start to work the gluten, which we don't want to do. Again, if you're doing it by hand, it's a lot easier to control for an amateur. But because I've been doing this for many years, it works well for me within the mixer. And obviously I'm doing this for speed as well, and for my sanity. But you guys at home, you know, you can definitely do this all by hand. It's a little process, but you know, you can't rush pastry, and you have to. It's best to do this the correct way for the best results. Right. So again, I'm just going to take it all out of my. So it's nice and crumbly. Look at that, beautiful. Have you noticed I haven't put any flour down at this point? Because again, if you're putting flour down, and what a lot of people tend to do is they put too much flour down, and then you're obviously altering the recipe. So no flour at this point. And all I'm going to do is going to push it together nice and gently, just like that, scooping up all the bits, and that's it. So I've pushed it together. I've not worked the dough, so this makes it pretty much usable straight away. It's still nice and cold, still beautifully cold, but yeah, there's your pastry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what most chefs do, get some cling film. Put that to one side a minute, get some cling film. And I'm just going to pop it in the middle and do that. Okay. And I'm just going to roll it like this. Okay, so there's your pastry. Because we're going to make the frangipan now, I'm just going to chuck that in the fridge, and we'll make the frangipan. Right, okay, for the frangipan, it's a fairly simple recipe. It's 200 of everything apart from the flour, which is only 25 grams. So we have 200 of egg, which I've beaten. We have 200 of room temp. Right, so everything here is at room temperature and not chilled, so it's working the reverse of the pastry. So I have 200 grams of unsalted Cornish butter, but you can use any butter, it's just some in Cornwall. Again, that's at room temperature. 200 sugar, and then 200 ground almonds. We only have 25 grams of, 50 grams of flour, and that's just to help bind your almond together, you know, and all your mixture together, so you get a good rise and it doesn't kind of separate as it's cooking, and it'll give a nice even texture. Again, the flour, plain flour or bread flour will work. Yeah, so I'll get the mixer and we'll go through step by step. Right, so let's do the frangipane before my battery runs out and I have to change it. Right, so here we go. So in goes the butter, all of it, and put your paddle on at this stage. So butter being at room temperature is going to help aerate your the butter and the sugar together. So we want it to get it really nice and fluffy. So in with your sugar, that's 200 sugar, 200 butter. Okay, so gently at first. And then just pick the speed up. And that's what we're aiming for, a really fluffy butter mix before we start adding our other dry ingredients. But obviously we have to add the egg, but I'm going to go through that once we get to the right texture. But this bit's a little bit trickier. So right, so my butter's doubled and got nice and light and white, as you can see. I've just scraped down. Just make sure you're always scraping down, otherwise you don't want other big clumps of butter in the base of your mixer. If you're doing this by hand again, it's easy enough to do, but you have to keep whisking it, or beating it with a spatula until it's nice and fluffy. Or if you've got a little hand whisk, it's easier to do that with the electric one. Okay, so before I incorporate my egg, I'm going to mix my almonds and flour together. The reason for this is that I may use some when I'm pouring my eggs in. If it starts to split out slightly, I'll just add a spoonful of the almond mix to bring it back together. But hopefully it shouldn't do too much. So yeah, so I'll mix those two together. I'm going to get the spoon ready. And then what we do is then, on a medium thing, we add maybe a little bit of egg at a time until it's all incorporated, basically. And that will also give you more volume in your butter. And again, you don't want it to split out. So you can just keep doing it. You can do it in a really slow, once the first bit started, you can just add it really slowly. Right, so we're at the stage where we can add the rest of our dry ingredients. So I'm going to stop at this point, and then I'm going to place all of my mix in, and I'm just going to fold it on a slow, because obviously, again, I don't want it. Well, you can't really overwork it too much anyway, because it's mainly almond flour, but you have got a bit of gluten in there. Okay, that's it really. As long as all your butter's in, I'm going to take it off, scrape down, which I've been doing constantly anyway. You must remember to scrape down. And then we're just going to finish it off by hand. Okay, so I'm just going to work it a little bit now, make sure I get all the butter from the bottom. Let's fold it in. Okay, so I've got my pastry out, a frangipane is made, sitting on the side. So I've cut about half the pastry in half. I'm going to lightly dust my surface and just a little bit on top, because the pastry's nice and cold. It should roll out quite nicely. Okay, so because we're going to a round, again I'm not going to add too much pressure while I'm rolling. And again, I'm rolling to the end. There, bubble in there. Never mind. Keep moving while you're rolling. As you can see, it sort of cracks around the edges, but it's nice cold pastry. but we'll work with that. So the size, because I obviously don't have cutters of such size anyway, but roll it out. I'm just going to join those up. Okay. I have got a plate the right size. Okay, so we want it quite thin. I'm just going to put a little bit more flour on there. Okay, bring them up. I'm just going to overlap that, make sure it gives me enough pastry. It's cracking because it's quite cold. Okay. Again, you can just push it together as and when. And of course, as you're rolling it out, it will get warmer and warmer. And now we're getting there. If you do see ripples, that means your surface needs a little bit more flour. That means it's sticking to the bench once you see waves. So it should be nice and smooth. Okay. So you can see I've rolled that out quite a lot. I'm just going to check the size of my plate. It needs a little bit more. So obviously my plate will be just a bit bigger than my pastry ring. So yeah, it's cracked a lot. But hey ho. There we go. Okay. Not ideal. I mean, if you did wait for a little bit longer for your pastry to get a little bit warmer, then it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Okay. But what I'm going to do is I'm just judging by the plate size. I'll make sure that it's long enough. I'm going to put a bit more flour down as well. Like I say, it's a very short pastry, this. So just bear that in mind. Okay, I think we're about there. So what we will do is, before it does get too warm, we're going to roll it over our ring. Being very careful. And here's our ring. Okay, so always go from back to... Whoa, try not to do that. Okay, so we have to work with it quite quickly at this point. So I'm just going to fold it in very gently, because you've got quite a sharp edge on your pastry ring. I'm just folding it in. There's a little gap in there, but we can fix that. Like that. See that bit dropped off there? Don't know if you can see. That's okay, because we'll fix that. But just nicely push it in at first. Okay. So now it's sort of all in. We can then shape it. Make sure it is all in. Right, and I always go around with sort of back of my nail right into the centre to make a nice sharp edge. Okay, it is quite flexible at this point as it's getting warmer, so it will allow you to manipulate it more. Okay. Okay, as long as you get that nice edge in the corner, we'll then trim it up and make it look pretty. Okay, so that's nice and covered. Just make sure it's nice and even all the way around. We're going to trim it nicely. So you get a nice clean edge, okay? So when you trim in, just like that. Okay. Right, so both tins have been lined, as you can see, all sets. So now I'm just going to blind bake this one. I'm going to have a go at not blind baking that one at all, just going to stick it in the oven as is. What I will do, of course, because with this one especially, that it will need the holes, as they do rise. I've got my oven on, it's at 180. And I'm just going to lightly do this one, but you don't really have to do it that much because obviously you're blind baking and the weight of the ingredient, the filling that's going into the blind bake will hold it down. So I get my cling film and I go across once and then twice. Now it's up to you whether you use cling film. I don't use the baking beans because I find that they leave little indentations in the pastry, and you can get this funny shaped cook. So I won't use that. I'll be using rice grains because they will disperse more evenly, which is what you're ideally looking for, and you're looking for a good all-rounded bake. So they can go in there and you fill it pretty much to the top, like so. You push it round, make sure it's nice and even. And this will give you a really nice even bake. And then I just keep this rice now will be just for when I blind bake things. One, it's cheaper than your baking beans as well. The little, I don't know what they're made of, clay or something. Okay, and then I fold this over so it makes a little bag. And what I might do, just to make sure it all seals together, is put a little piece on top, because of the width, so a little bit there. And the reason I do this, because this then makes its own little packet, and you can reuse it if you keep it in the cling film, which I will show you in a minute. Okay, so now that's all done. Into the oven it goes. So I've put these in, as you can see, I've made sure they're pushed in all the way round, and the pastry hopefully is good enough to hold itself, and we shall see, as time will tell. It'll either come out really well or it'll come out really bad, but I'm hoping it's going to be great. So into the oven. Little shelf for one. Quite heavy, so that shouldn't buckle. And as for these two, because they've got they're quite light and they won't have the middle part, which I'm going to try and just tuck my tray in between the lines. Okay, my cases have been cooking for 10 minutes. Let me put my gauntlets on. You like them? Nice. For 10 minutes, so they've kind of at 180, that is 10 minutes at 180. I should give you a close look in a sec, and they cook very nicely and evenly without the sides dropping. They get a tiny bit of shrinkage, but nothing too much. Okay. Yeah, so that's, remember, 10 minutes, 180. For both bakes, but you'll see the reason why underneath. Right, so just wanted to show you something. So what we're going to do next is remove this inner part. And as you can see underneath, it's not fully cooked. So we return this back for 5 minutes. It's not going to go anywhere. And the holes that we put in previously will help it to stop jumping up. So this one goes in a minute. And I'll show you these. So these went in for the same time, so that's 10 minutes at 180. And we'll take the ring off. And you see you've got a nice pastry case there. Okay. And it's not fully baked, but it will bake again when we do our frangipane and filling. Again, so it's a nice bake. Okay. So this one is going to go in further for another 5 to 6 minutes. And then we'll remove that, make sure they're both cold before we start adding the frangipane and the fillings. I'm just hoping I've got enough frangipane for this and these little ones. Okay, so pastry cases have cooled down. I'm going to do this one the traditional way. Yeah. So jam in the bottom. Again, you want a nice liberal layer all the way to the edge. Obviously you can't put shed loads in because when you go to pipe your frangipane in, it will just go sort of splay to the edges. So you get a nice even layer. And then again, you don't want the jam coming up the sides of the tart. You want to create a nice seal when you put your frangipane in to prevent that from happening. Okay, a little bit more. A massive tart this. I can't even eat him. Somebody's in for a treat. Okay, so the jam's in. Okay, so we have our frangipane. I've just loosened it up a little bit because although it's been sat out, it's still solidified a bit because of the butter content. But yeah, and then that will go into our piping bags. You don't have to use a piping bag. You can spoon it on and spread it around with the back of a spoon, but I find it's just easier to do it this way. Yeah, circular. If I can get my circulars right, because it's been a while since I've done them also, but it shouldn't be a problem because we're going to spread it out anyway. So I've just left enough frangipane in there, hoping that what I've got in here is going to be enough for this one. We shall see. So again, make sure your bag's all sealed up. So you don't actually need a piping nozzle this time. Now I'm just going to cut a hole into the bottom, like so. Maybe a bit bigger. Again, these aren't the best piping bags because they're really thin and poorly made. So yeah, so what I'm going to do now is just pipe into a circle. See how the jam makes it move. So it may be that I've only got enough for one, so I might have to make some extra for the other tarts, which is no problem because it doesn't take too long. Yeah, create that seal when you go around the edges. Because we're going to go over it with the back of the spoon anyway, just to make sure it's all even. Okay. And what I'm going to do as well, I'm just going to pinch a bit out of there. I think we have got enough for all the tarts, because we don't need much for them. They're only small, so let's just take that, get another spoon, and just spoon it into some of the gaps there, look, and there. Okay, so with the back of the spoon, I'm just going to smooth it over. I haven't got a palette knife, which is crazy, which I'd usually use a palette knife. Okay, just smooth it over and make sure you've got a seal between that and your pastry. Doesn't matter about the lumps because they will even out when it cooks, when it starts to rise, because it's got a high butter content. It will self-level. Okay, but just make sure you've got a nice seal between. Okay, and obviously for this one, because it's a traditional, we will put almonds on them. And we just sprinkle some flaked almonds over the top. Just like that. Right, so here we have the two smaller ones, which I'm going to use a bit of black cherry jam. And obviously, because I haven't got the sour cherries, I'm just going to use glacé cherries, those old classics. That's hoping I've got enough frangipane for both the tarts. I think so. I shall make it so. Okay, so that's that up to the edge. Got a little bit of cherry jam, haven't you? Okay. A bit more just in there. Look at that, delish. I could eat that just now. That's the part I can eat. Once I've had the frangipane, I can't eat. So again, if we've got enough for two, just work in and out. I might just cut that a bit bigger. You make sure you cover the jam if you've got bits in there. Again, create a nice seal. Okay. And again with this one. Oh, why have I started on the outside? Silly me. There you go. So just spread whatever you've got left in there. That'll make a nice rise now. Again with a little spoon, we're just going to tidy it up to the edges. So on this we rely mostly on the eggs giving you the rise. Okay, so make sure the seal so the jam doesn't pop out the top. Cake will, the sponge or the frangipane or whatever you want to call it, will stop that from happening. Okay, so now that's done, I'm going to get my glacé cherries, which you love. I'm just going to pop one there, one there, one there, one there. There you go. So remember, because you have them poking out the surface, I cook these at a slightly lower temperature, so I'm going to cook these up now 160 for roughly 20 minutes, but I will check because obviously we've got the bigger one, so that will go in at the same time, but these will come out sooner, so these might take a little bit less, so maybe 15 or so minutes. Okay, so now tarts are out at 160. The small ones took roughly 25 to 30 minutes. I think it was 27 minutes in all, and the larger one took 35 minutes. That's all depending on your oven. Well, I'm just going to glaze these now with a bit of honey, hot honey. Okay, so we'll put that there. and we just go over nice and gently while they're still warm. And I leave them on the tray for a little bit just to cool down, and then I'm going to put them onto a wire rack. Just to get the air around them, to cool them down a little bit quicker, and then we'll cut into them and you can see what they look like. I think they're looking pretty bangy myself, so we'll have some happy people. Okay, let's swap over and we'll do the same with this one. So as you can see, I've got a bit of a lip here because I obviously had to spread the almond paste between, but if you're making one, you could fill that up a little bit further just so it's level. You can fill it up to literally just under, and it will rise without going over. So there we have it, guys, a couple of nice little select Bakewells. I shall cut into them and upload some pictures just so you know what it looks like. So I'd just like to say thanks for joining me on this Bakewell cook-off. I'm not sure what I'm going to do next, but please remember to like, subscribe, share this as well, will be great help, and we can hopefully get something going on a weekly basis for this. Obviously the editing and everything else, it takes a little time, but I think it's worth it, and I think it's hopefully self-explanatory on the demos, and I'm doing a good job for you all. So yeah, again, my website is www.thepastrychefcornwall.co.uk. It's free to join. I will update it as I'm going along, and there's some things I need to put in there, like the links to this, but you know, you can go on there and find all my sort of recipes, and if you need to contact me through that website, then I'm fully contactable for anything to do with pastries. So please, again, show you a bit of your support and like and subscribe. Thank you.